This booklet called Educating for Sustainable Lifestyle that was developed specifically for primary school teachers in Costa Rica, and that we launched together with the launch of the United Nations Decade on Education for Sustainable Development in 2005. So it was really particularly trying to help educators of a third grade, fourth grade in Costa Rica to incorporate the Earth Charter in classes of mathematics, social studies, language, arts, and etc. So this booklet also focused a lot on images in art and stories. We also developed a book bringing sustainability into classrooms back in 2005, and a number of other resources that we put together as Earth Charter bibliography. So these are some of the selected resources that are helping to inform my thinking and what I'm sharing with you, and inform the work we have done here. So the UNESCO chair that we coordinate here, and we have been working with this since 2012, has a focus on that intersection between what is sustainability, what are the sustainability values, and how can we bring that into education. So the intersection of these three areas is really at the focus of our own area of interest, trying to answer the question of values, how to bring the values of sustainability into education. So some of the questions that, of course, stimulate our thinking is, what values are being cultivated through the current education system and through the process of teaching and learning? Are the values of cooperation, or are the values of competition? Are the values of self-interest, or are values focused on the common good? Are values that are focused on the respect and care for the large living world, respect and care for the community of life, or are we cultivating values that are focused on respect and care of your own self and your own close family? So clearly, one of our findings is that the values that can guide humanity towards a more just and sustainable world are not the same values that are guiding humanity towards injustice and an unsustainable world. Another question that have been stimulating our thinking here is, are we cultivating a culture of care and respect for the large living world, as it's articulated in the Earth Charter, in our education system, in our schools, in our classrooms? Or are we nurturing explicitly or not the values of unsustainability through our education culture, through the culture that we cultivate in a classroom or in a school environment? And therefore, can we make the values and principles of sustainability and global citizenship more visible in our school culture, in our classroom culture, and should we? So in some of the documents that we find or in UNESCO, or the documents that UNESCO have been promoting over the past few years, such as the Education 2030 and a framework for action that you can easily find in the internet, they stress the importance of values. So for instance, when they talk about what is ESD, or even when they talk about that articulate the importance of quality education, as you can see in the paragraphs there, values are always appear here and there. So they're looking at, okay, ESD as something that provides learners with the opportunities to acquire throughout life, the knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes that are needed to build a peaceful, healthy, and sustainable society. They also say that quality education includes the development of those skills, those values, those attitudes, and knowledge that enable citizens to lead healthy and fulfilled lives. Just one more, coming from one of the documents that UNESCO has been using since, I think, over 10 years, since 2012. Education for sustainable development really consists, so that document says, consists in educating to generate social transformation with the objective to create more sustainable societies. And the goal of the UNESCO ESD effort is to incorporate the values inherent to sustainability in all aspects of learning. So I'm just sharing this with you to mention that from time to time in UNESCO documents or in policy making around education, we hear the word, it's important to cultivate or to promote or to incorporate the values inherent to sustainability in all aspects of learning. But the question then is, how can we make that happen, right? How to incorporate the values and principles of sustainability. And I think sustainability values and principles of sustainability and global citizenship are quite similar in a way. And how can we make that happen and incorporate it in processes of education and learning? So we find some walls when we are trying to do that, right? Despite the fact that it's so well articulated in a number of UNESCO documents and maybe probably in national policies and programs on education, and probably even in the mission of many schools, I would say that we often will be finding the importance of cultivating values. But then we find some walls. There's some perceptions with regards to values-based education or values education, and it's often perceived as a religious education, but my understanding after my research is that it's not always the case. There's also a perception that values-based education is always carried out in a vertical, authoritarian, or transmissive way, limited to theory or disconnected from reality. But it's not always the case. There's also a perception that values clarification, examination, or reflection is considered superfluous, useless, or abstract by many, but they are actually reflected in our behavior in daily decisions. So you see, these, I'm just kind of making visible here some of the walls or the stones that we can find on the way when we are trying to promote or work with values-based education or values education for sustainability. There's also a perception that the study of values or ethics belongs exclusively to the domain of philosophers or scholars in religion or ethics. But the reality is that it's a subject that is, again, presented in our daily lives. And therefore, it's not really a subject that should only belong to a certain area of expertise. So here is, I'm coming to share with you what were our findings. After 10 years at looking at, okay, there are some of these perceptions that hit the wall in terms of, people try to avoid talking about the importance of values education or trying to make it happen because of these misperceptions with regards to how values education can actually be carried out. And this misperception that thinking that, oh no, this is a religious thing, let's keep it away from our school. Or this is something that is very transmissive or vertical and that doesn't belong to the new paradigm of education. However, through the experience that we have had over the past 20 years, and also based on the research that I mentioned earlier on done on a number of experiences in over 30 countries around the world, in all regions of the world, using the Earth Charter as an instrument to cultivate the values and principles of sustainability, we found out that actually it can be done. It can be done in a non-abstracted way. It can be done in a non-theoretical way, and it can be done in many ways in a fun way. And here are some of the 7 elements that we found in how these experiences are undertaking values education through the lenses of the Earth Charter. So we identified 7 elements, or you can see maybe 7 keys or 7 ingredients to make it happen in a way that we can, how to say, be stimulating more transformative learning through values education. The first element, it has to do with the human connection. And this is not just about values education. I think it would be an element for any education that is striving to become or to generate an experience of transformative learning. We have to figure out ways to generate a human bond. We have to recognize the importance of the human connection that needs to emerge through the learning process. We are so focused on the content when we come in an experience of education. We're so focused on the content that we forget to look at the eyes of the learner, and we forget to be mindful and pay attention to the importance of generating a human connection. Again, human connection does not necessarily relate to the teacher and learner connection, which is very important, but it also relates to the connection that we can generate among learners. The second element involves the importance to stimulate and cultivate the human nature connection. It's very hard for us to be cultivating the values of care and respect for the large living world if there is a perception of disconnection of many with the large living world. In other words, how can we stimulate a connection with the oceans or with the birds or with a flower if people, kids, and all of us are spending less and less and less time in nature, with nature? So the human nature connection really recognizes the whole dimension or the ingredient that requires schools and anyone who wants to generate a learning environment to cultivate the values of sustainability and even global citizenship, to create more spaces, to generate spaces in which people can actually maybe even learn outdoors or close their eyes and feel the connection between the air we breathe in, our lungs, and where that comes from nature. So it's kind of really generating spaces to stimulate the human nature connection. Question. So the importance of the inquiry. So Paulo Freire has a book that talks about the pedagogy of the question. And I think this is actually one of the most difficult ones for a teacher, because we are not necessarily very good in asking good questions. And we have to ask ourselves how can I ask better questions for the new generation? Questions that spark interest, questions that allow also the time for the learner to search for the answer. What I often find on the way is that whenever, in many times, a teacher asks a question and immediately gives the answer, or ask a question that learners don't necessarily connect well with that. But despite the fact that from an Earth Charter perspective, many people criticize that the Earth Charter gives the answers, I have found through these many experiences that we have looked at and through our own experience, is that the Earth Charter has been actually used as an instrument to ask questions, in such a way that we guide the learner to link ideas with their own lives, or questions that invites the learner to examine their own assumptions and beliefs and values, and question them too, among others. The pedagogy of dialogue. So we know many education philosophers have also been talking about dialogue, and but the reality is that in mainstream education, we find actually little room for deep dialogue. However, through the experiences I have been looking at, and through the way in which we have been striving to cultivate experiences of learning through the lenses of the Earth Charter, pays significant attention to the importance of dialogue. Not a monologue, like what I'm doing now, but dialogue in a way that the conversation does not just stay in the surface, but it's able to go to deeper levels. So you can see two instruments on the screen there. One is a dropper, and one is the ear. So they're both very much related to these two elements of question and dialogue. And a dropper for me is something that I would invite all educators to have to always carry a dropper in their pocket, or always carry a dropper in their mind. A dropper, the purpose of a dropper is to dosify how much we are giving, how much space we are taking. And I think, again, this is one of the most difficult things for, I would say, an educator, is to dosify the amount of information that's given, the amount of space that the educator is taking, in such a way that it allows the learner to spend time within a question, that allows the learner to spend time in going from a superficial or shallow dialogue into a deeper dialogue. So a dropper is really a very important instrument or element in this process of education, values education through the lenses of the Earth Charter. In the ear, because we often talk about, when we often speak about the dialogue, we sometimes picture ourselves speaking. However, a big portion of the dialogue has to do with the capacity to, the capacity to learn, to listen to others, listen carefully and deeply. And I think these are all skills, not only for the learners to learn, but actually for the educator to learn and to be stimulated. Another key pedagogical element that we found through our experiences and these other education experiences that we have been looking at is the aesthetics of the place, the beauty, the sense of beauty. Really, it's something that is inviting or not the learner to come in. It's opening the hearts and the minds and the ears and the senses of the learner through the aesthetics of the place, or it's closing the possibilities of learning. And we have been looking at that from our own space here, our own learning space, and through the lenses of the learning spaces of schools that we have visited over the years is the capacity to be mindful of the teacher or the school administration, to really be mindful and caring in such a way that the aesthetics of the place would reflect the values of care and the values of respect through the way in which things are organized in the space. Actually, this is not new. Among others, we know that Montessori is certainly often said that the physical space and actually the teacher are also the third teacher in the living experience. I'm almost done. I have just 2 more points. The holistic approach to education, the systemic approach to education, looking at the classroom as through the lenses of a system. It's a new lenses that it's an important lens that the educator requires to also carry with them. Again, when we often come to a learning and teaching environment, we come very focused on the content that we have to bring in. And sometimes we forget to take the pulse and look at the system, starting with our own human system in terms of the well-being of ourselves as teachers, educators, the well-being of the learners, the physical and emotional well-being. So many people are now talking about the social emotional learning in the process of education, and being mindful and caring for that. And therefore, it's kind of a key element that we need to give visibility, that it's important to consider that in such a way to make sure the learning process is more conducive to be a transformative learning experience. And then lastly, we have been experiencing over many years the use of arts and storytelling in the learning process. And as I mentioned, the 2 stories that I mentioned at the beginning, the Earthshatter game and the pictures of success, but many other, actually most of the other stories that I have looked at in over 30 countries, on how over 100 different stories have been using the Earthshatter as an instrument to cultivate the values and principles of sustainability and global citizenship. Most of them have been using arts and storytelling as an important element in that education process. Now, we often think about arts and storytelling as an element to be brought to kids, to children. However, I have seen that is actually quite useful in using arts and storytelling as key pedagogical elements for cultivating values also in adult education, in university students, in professional development. Quite often here over the past 10 years, when we invite an adult to draw not what they think, but draw what they feel about social injustices or about unsustainability or about sustainability, I often hear them saying, wow, I haven't been drawing for many, many years, and how peaceful that felt. I often hear adults sometimes saying, oh, I'm sorry, I cannot draw. But after they go through it, the sense of gratitude and joy, it's often on the table and in the environment. Storytelling, the example of pictures of success is one example of the many that we have found, but stories can be an instrument in such a way that either is a story that the educator brings, is a story that the educator ask the learner to generate a story based on a principle that they find in their charter, or it can be a story that they can find even in a newspaper or etc., that they can link to a principle of their charter. So we have found many ways in which storytelling has been used quite largely in these experiences. So with this, I'm happy to close my presentation to you for now, and we'll be happy to answer any question or comment. Thank you. And again, I'm sorry, I think I was not very focused because there was a lot of noise around me here this morning, because again, it's the graduation day here. Thank you.
Mirian, thank you so much. I really enjoyed your presentation and I learned so much. I was very impressed that you distilled 20 years of research on the Earth Charter into these 7 elements and keys for teaching the values of the Earth Charter in school settings, and I imagine other places as well. So on the thematic unit that you wrote for us for course networking, you included a link to a video that was made in Costa Rica of a school that implements the Earth Charter and how they do it at the different grade levels. Were they one of the places that you did your research? And could you tell us just a bit more of that school and that research process?
Sure, yes. That school is a school that I first went in 1996. It was a very small school and they transformed over the years. And they continue to be quite interesting. It's a private school, small private school in Costa Rica, in Heredia. And they have made values education at the core of their work. And since that time, they have been using their charter as an instrument in their teaching, incorporating cross-cutting across all areas of subject. So therefore, yes, that school is certainly one very good example that we have been using here to learn from them. So they really, I think there's one thing that I wanted to, there could be many things I could mention about that school, but one is their ability to cultivate a sense of responsibility and ownership of the students through the projects that they engage the students. So for instance, first grade students have the responsibility to bring the residuals, the waste from the kitchen to the animals, so that the animals are going to eat, or to bring it to the composting. And the feeling that we have when I went there over the years, actually almost every year, to talk with the students, is the sense of pride and responsibility that this is my project, this is my responsibility to take care of the animals and to take care of this compost. So they share with a lot of pride. So the school makes the students get out of their chairs and get out of their books and notebooks and do something and then reflect about it, right? The older students of 6th grades, some of them are involved in helping to separate actually helping with the garden, or helping with the plants in the school. This is actually not something that is extra. This is part of the curriculum. But the point that I'm trying to highlight here is that how wonderful it is to see the sense of pride and ownership of the project and sense of responsibility that they cultivate, without telling them you have to be responsible. without telling them you have to care. It's just giving the kids the opportunity to be responsible with something, and the sense of care and responsibility emerges out of what they are doing. And even more so when they invite the students to actually reflect about what they are doing. So they of course, they always link with the values of their charter at the end, but it's kind of something that is embedded in the school culture. The last year students of high school, to give you an example, they are in charge of the butterfly farm. So there's a huge butterfly farm, there's a forest, and the students are in charge of two projects. One is the butterfly farm, that there's a lot of work to be done. So they have to go there twice a week to care, to clean, to do things in the butterfly farm. And others have their science class in the farm, in the forest, and they have to do measurements of the trees and counting and the different kinds. So it's kind of very practical, extremely experiential, and it certainly stimulates a lot of the sense of responsibility and care in the students.
Thank you. So I have a question in the chat box, and it talks about the importance of community. The question is how do I support and make better my community? And how do they support and make me better? And how can I bring these questions into my classroom? Now, so I know through your work through the Earth Charter that it is very community-based, and you are quite good at explaining how to us. So could you please talk about that interrelationship between the community and the classroom and the teacher?
Mm-hmm. Well, we could answer that through different angles, but let me start by bringing again the example of that school. They school throughout the year, and actually other schools here in Costa Rica also, they really make a good bridge with the local community where they are inserted by bringing the students to do some projects, for instance, the recycling. So collecting waste materials from the community, or bringing the plants or even the vegetables that are cultivated in the school to the community and vice versa. So there's kind of a bridge of exchange between the school and the community where they are located. And some of it is, of course, done through the families and the parents of their own school. I know other schools here in Costa Rica also that have been bringing their students to talk with people in the community, to kind of to do some sort of service learning, either with the elders in the community, to have more dialogue with them, to bring some presence and exchange with the elders in the community, or in helping to do river cleaning and etc. But I would like to make a reflection on the idea of community. So when we have a sense of belonging to a community, there is an indication of a sense of belonging. And with that sense of belonging comes an idea of, I have some rights and duties, rights and responsibility. And the question is, what is my ethical responsibility with the community that I belong to? It can be my classroom is a community, the school is another community, my family is a community, right? My country, my city, and the world, the planet is a community that we belong to. So through the lenses of their charter, there is a concerted effort to stimulate our sense of community, our sense of belonging, our sense of care and responsibility towards our community in all those levels, from my own family and friends, the community of my classroom, the community of my school, my city, my country, or the sense of community of the planet that I belong to. And with that sense of community comes a deep sense of responsibility for the well-being of the members of that whole community, being also not just the human community, but the community of life as it's articulated in their charter. So when we are doing values education through the lenses of their charter, there is a clear and consistent effort to amplify or expand our consciousness with regards to what is our sense of community? What is the community we belong to? And keep amplifying that's not just my family, it's not just my school, it's actually the school neighbors, it's the whole neighborhood, and it's kind of keep amplifying to the human family in the planet and the whole living world in the planet Earth. And again, coming back to the sense of community, that that's why I think the values and principles of sustainability that are articulated in their charter address both the whole idea of global citizenship, but also sustainability. So that's why it's values education for global citizenship and sustainability that we can use their charter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know one thing that you said to me early on that really made me understand the importance of the Earth Charter was you said, you know, the Declaration of Human Rights that was written in the late 1940s focuses on human rights, and the Earth Charter focuses on human responsibilities. And I thank you for that, because that has just stuck with me ever since. And it was like a turning point in my understanding of the Earth Charter. So that's why I'm sharing it with everybody here. So we have another question here. And it comes from Akpete Kanu, who is from Nigeria, and she's currently located in the United Kingdom. And she said, the established modalities seem to be too entrenched to be breached. Any suggestions on how we bring the Earth Charter into our school systems, our education systems that seem to be so entrenched?
Mm-hmm. I think we can make things flexible inside the rigidity of the system. It's true that if I understood well, the question is the system is very rigid, and how can, and there's a lot of content and curriculum and things to implement.
Yes,
that it's hard to do anything different. I think it requires the ability of the educator to dance inside that space of rigidity, but there is some room, and we could almost say a lot of room for making things differently. The same thing, but in a different way. So, for instance, there are a lot of requirements for mathematics, a lot of requirements for language. At the end of the year, there are exams. At the end of primary school or at the end of secondary school, there are national exams that kids need to pass, right? And of course, parents are behind, wanting to see their kids with the highest scores, and schools wants to also show off and say we have kids with the highest high scores in the national exams. But for instance, if the exams are on language, mathematics, even science, I think we can make use of instruments such as the Earth Charter, even in classes of language or even in classes of mathematics, by depending on the kind of exercises you give them to improve their language skills or even to improve their mathematics in social or history skills. Actually, that booklet that I showed you at the beginning, educating towards sustainable lifestyles through the lens of the Earth Charter, gives a lot of examples of how that can be done, such as mathematics is just throughout the year, have the school kids look at their water or electricity house invoices and do projections or calculations of how much there was a change, how much money was spent, how much kilowatts was used, and then have a conversation about what the energy comes from, where does that come from, what's that impact, how do I use it? So it's kind of, we are having a mathematics class and we are doing numbers and calculations, but we are also looking at deeper things around the calculus. So just give a quick example.
Thank you, Miriam. And if I remember correctly, those resources that you shared at the beginning are downloadable for free from the Earth Charter Education Center. So those many examples have how to use the Earth Charter within established curriculum exist already, and people can just go to those. I would like to say that we had some very positive comments coming in during your explanation there. And Ingrid writes, lovely analogy, Miriam, dancing within the space. And then Irini writes, creativity. So we have a lot of affirming responses here. Now, I would like to ask Ahmad to open his mic and ask the question that he has here. Ahmad, are you still on? Well, so his question was.
Yes, I am here. I'm here. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So my question is about I think Mirian mentioned that most people think that values education are related to religious education or religion, and that is not actually a negative thing. That's a positive thing. That if we can utilize that and emphasize it and strengthen our students' value system. Especially because it is the religious value system is not actually contradictory with the ESG values and the natural values. So, where is the location of religious and how can we use the religious values, learners' religious values in our education to strengthen the ESG values in our education system?
Oh, thank you. That's a very interesting question. Ahmad, I think it depends on the context where we are. You're totally right. The values that are articulated actually in the worldview of the Earth Charter and global citizenship are very common and similar to most traditional religious values, right? We actually have also a publication on that, which I strongly recommend you to look at. It's called Synergies with Faith, Values, and ESD. We did it in 2012 for UNESCO, actually, and it's a quite interesting publication because we bring the voices of people from various or the most important religious traditions and ask the question, what are your most important religious traditional values, and how does that link with the ESD? And we found that they are all, of course, very similar. And one very interesting that I would like to highlight is the importance of interconnectedness that is in the heart of most religions around the world, and is also in the heart of the Earth Charter, right? And in the heart of ESD. So they are, of course, very similar. I think the issue here is that in some parts of the world, religion has been seen as something that should be out of education. And even in Brazil, I can talk about Brazil, there has been a lot of discussion about the importance to consider education as values neutral, or the importance to not have any education, religious education inside the public education system. So that's a reality in Brazil. It's something that it's a very controversial and touchy issue. Even when people stress that education should be values neutral, and the fact from my perspective and in the perspective of many people is that there is no such thing as a neutral education, because even new values neutral education, because even when we say, okay, we are not going to promote any values in this education system, this is already standing on something. So anyway, I hope I shared with something. Yeah. So yes, if you are in a context of a religious school, or in a context that that it's easier to talk about religious education, certainly. I mean, that's even easier and better. It's not a bad thing.
All right. We have about 2 or 3 minutes left. Does somebody want to open their mic and ask a question of Dr. Vilela? Okay, so we have some lovely comments here saying, very interesting presentation. Thank you very much. And a beautiful artistic globalization, citizenship, and inspiration. Thank you. There are other comments back and forth between participants. Ividani mentioned that, you know, we're thinking about colonizing Mars. You know, they're sampling the soil right now, and they will pick those up and then see if maybe it could be a place of that we could colonize in the future. But the great irony is really need to take better care of our planet Earth and all of its inhabitants so that we can remain here.
Yeah,
Thank you for the irony, Ividani.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's you know, can I just mention one last reflection? It's depending on the context where we are, when we talk about values education, it can be very touchy and sensitive. But I think we have to have the courage, but also the understanding that values education is not supposed to be a vertical thing. It's not supposed to be making people learn by heart that respect and care is important. Values education is about asking good questions of why do we need to care? Why do we need to respect? What happens if we don't, right? So it's really about helping the learner to connect these ideas with their own lives. It's really helping the learners to connect these ideas with concrete living experiences and examples, to make these concepts alive in their and meaningful in their lives. And I think that's one of the challenges.
Thank you. Lorna, did I see you had a last question or comments?
No, I was just saying thanks to Mirian for such an excellent presentation. Thank you.
So yes, and Miriam, we would all like to say thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. it's helping all of us think about values and how we use values in our classrooms very differently. Thank you for approaching both the theory and the how do we do this. I remind all of you that we will be back online in August with another live conversation. We are taking the month of July off because it is vacation for so many people in the Northern Hemisphere, but we will be back in August. So huge thank you, Miriam, for your presentation, and thank you all for participating. Bye.
Thank you.